Hey, joining us now, contributor to the conservative website The Bulwark and host of Not My Party on Snapchat, Tim Miller. He's author of the new book titled Why We Did It, a travel log from the Republican road to hell. And here we are, Tim. Here we are.
You like that, Joe?
Yeah, I like that. You know, it's in my formative years. You know, I always said the guy who I thought was the most effective governor was Jeb Bush, a guy you know very well. Yeah. You look back not so many years ago when you had Republican governors like Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney, George Voinovich. I could go down the list. And now we find ourselves after this decision, the Supreme Court decision on abortion, which looks like it'll go into contraceptives, marriage equality, et cetera, going back to states that is, even David French says, are run by legislators who are passing some of the most extreme right-wing legislation ever. What's it mean?
Yeah, look, I think one of the core things that I try to tease out in the book is that what we've discovered over the past 12 years, this is something that we probably should have known in 2008 with Sarah Palin was the first red flag in 2010, but there's this Republican political class in D.C., that's who I focus on and who I write about in the book, and they are, you know, more in the mold of all of the people you just laid out, Mitt Romney-type Republicans in their personal life. And I think they have felt like they have the strategic acumen to use who you called in the last segment, the crazies, the kooks, the extremists, you know, the ultra MAGAs, you know, to their ends as far as, you know, cutting taxes and strong national defense, et cetera. And what really has happened is the opposite. It's that the crazies and the kooks have been dragging along the establishment with them and have taken over the party, essentially. And so what I tried to figure out is, how do these people who have not left the party like I did justify to themselves sticking around for this when it's so obvious that it is the, you know, as Hillary Clinton called them, the deplorables who are now in charge and you know, they're just making their dinner.
Yeah, and you know, the remarkable thing is you have all of these people who are in the Republican establishment that when I was in the Republican Party, when I was in Washington, I would look at them as being too establishment, right? Too much in the Bush camp, too you name it, too Chamber of Commerce, yeah. too establishmentarian, and they were these self-dealers, and they always said, oh, you're too radical, Scarborough, you're too this, you're too that. They're the Trumpists now. I start with Ginny Thomas. I raise you Matt Schlapp. These were the most establishment Republicans there were, working for Dick Armey, working for the Bushes inside the White House. Now, all of a sudden, oh, they're the fire breathers who are saying, why don't we just take down the federal government because our guy didn't win? I guess, what a shock. It was all about power all along.
Yeah, it was all about power. It was all about money. And the weird thing is it's actually kind of more pathetic than being about power, Joe. It's being about being around power. You know, these characters are so addicted to being in the room where it happens, so to speak, right? And they become obsessed with that. And that's how they made all of their decisions. And so, you know, when I went back and interviewed them, it's my old boss, Reince Priebus. You know, I asked him about this. I tell a story about a time we were in Miami right after it was clear Trump was going to win Florida. And I said to him, we were friends. He was my former boss. I said, Chairman, you got to bail now. I said, you got to let Trump put in one of his own people because he is going to tarnish you forever. And he said to me, you know, he said, Tim, I promise you, you know, we need to have good people in the room. You know, we need to have somebody around. And if it ever gets out of control, then I will be, you know, and then I'll jump off the ship and I'll wave the flag. We know that didn't happen. And so, you know, they're Matt Schlapp, you know, we can go on and on giving these examples. And they all have different reasons. And that's what I try to tease out.
Well, you know, Willie, again, it is for Tim and myself, it's so disconcerting because we've been in the room when decisions were being made, when people like Paul Ryan was in that room and others were in that room who were like, okay, yeah, well, they make the right decisions. They're going to make the right. Something happened when Donald Trump came to town where people who, again, I knew Paul from the time he was like 23, 24, when he was actually working on staff for one of our groups in Washington. And you have Paul on, you know, maybe a Tuesday saying that Donald Trump is a racist. and he endorses him the next day. There is no explaining that.
No.
And it not just happened to Paul. I'm not picking on Paul specifically. It happened to just about everybody that Tim and I knew. I mean, this was simple. And let me just say how simple it is. When Donald Trump brings up a Muslim registry in December of 2015, at that point you say, I'm out. I'm out. Oh, wait, they're doing the same thing that the Nazis were doing in Germany in 1933. Okay, this is a good time to jump out of the plane with my parachute on. And nobody did. I did. I'm sure Tim did. Nobody else did.
Yeah, I mean, it started for me with an insult to John McCain in July of 2015, and you thought, okay, he's done. John McCain's an icon in the country and certainly in the party, and it didn't hurt him. And you go, okay, this will be interesting to watch. Then a Muslim ban. It goes on all the way to staging a coup, an attempted coup against the United States government. And still, Tim, no, those people that you just mentioned don't abandon him. They say, you write a lot about Elise Stefanik in the book, who wants to be Speaker of the House, of course. She was sort of a conventional establishment Republican, worked on the Romney campaign, worked in the Bush White House, and now here she is saying that the January 6th committee is a witch hunt and using all of President Trump's language. Clearly for her, that's about power. But I guess the question a lot of people have always had is, how do you look yourself in the mirror if you're a Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, who's been insulted through an entire presidential campaign, and then still to bend a knee to Donald Trump? Where does personal pride ever come into this?
I found there wasn't a lot of personal pride. There's a lot of rationalizations. This is what I had to grapple with, right? It was so obvious. It was so obvious that he was unfit and that he was beyond the pale, right? And I looked at all these people who are my friends and who I'd worked with, who I know knew better. Right? I got a text yesterday from a far-right reporter who had gotten an early copy of the book. And despite the fact that I tag him and his ilk at Breitbart and them as bigots and extremists, he was like, you got it right. Because he's like, we are in charge here. And all of these guys, all of the Elise Stefaniks are getting drugged to the extreme by us. And that's what makes them kind of the ones that are so that's so hard to grapple with, right? That it feels so gross. And so I had to go back and interview them. And I interviewed, Elise went and talked to me, but she was more than moderate, right? Or she was more than just a conventional Republican. She was a moderate. When she first ran, she was like a Tim Miller Republican, pro-climate, we got to deal with climate change, gay rights, immigration, you name it. She's like, we got to reform the party. And here she is now as Trump's #1 cheerleader, a nativist. And so, I had coffee, I had drinks with one of my friends who worked with me on John Huntsman's campaign, a moderate campaign. And she went all the way to the insurrection. She was there at the mall. And so we had to meet, and I had to just pick her brain and say, how? How is this possible? And what you find is a lot of these folks have decided that the left is so evil that justifies anything. And the only way, I think, to break this is to try to, get them to, step back from the precipice of these tribalist fights that we're having.
And I'm sure you heard over the weekend, some Republicans say after the Roe decision, that's why I voted for Donald Trump. He put 3 justices on the Supreme Court and overturned Donald Trump. That's from a pro-lifer's perspective. Sure. But the question for someone like Elise Stefanik, and there are a million other ones, which person is she? Is she the person that you knew way back when, who was like you on so many issues? Yeah. Or is she a nativist? Does she believe these things?
She's just a striver. And that's just as simple as that. I do think that her core beliefs were the moderate, center-right beliefs that she espoused back then. But I think when you go back and look at her career, which I did, I interviewed all her friends. What you find is this is just somebody who was just addicted to being on the path to the top. Yeah. And so when she had to change paths to do it, she did, and it didn't matter. She dropped all the people that helped her get there. Her original team that was all around her on that first campaign, where she was going to be a new face, a new welcoming, compassionate face for the party. None of them are with her anymore. And some of them had very hard falling out because, she just, was not going to let anything stop her. And I think that she's going to be on the short list, if it's Donald Trump especially. I think she's going to be on the short list for one of the 3 people who could be the vice president of the United States. This is the hardest thing to grapple with about all this. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's paying off for her. And that's why I think it's so important to just expose how shameless it is and how fraudulent it is.
It is shameless. It also, Caddy, has happened for quite some time. Newt Gingrich ran as a Rockefeller Republican in 1974. He lost. He ran as a Rockefeller Republican in 1976. He lost. He decided to run as a fire-breathing right-winger in 1978, and the rest is history. He won.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question would be is, in recent years, this kind of started with Trump, and Trump fed this movement, particularly in the case of somebody like Elise Stefanik. But to what extent, Tim, has this got bigger than Trump, particularly around issues around democracy and elections and 2020 and the insurrection up on the Capitol? I wonder whether the movement, the genie is out of the bottle and has got beyond him. And were Trump to disappear from the political scene tomorrow, I'm not sure that much would change. I think this, particularly around election denial, I think it's out there. And it's now become a sort of creed in and of itself that is almost bigger than Trump is.
I basically agree. I think Trump has a couple of unique traits that make him particularly dangerous. His shamelessness, his Putinphilia, some of that stuff I don't think would continue. But here's the thing about Donald Trump. Everybody on this panel knows this. This didn't have to be the kind of campaign he ran. He was a totally different guy in the 80s and 90s, with a couple of exceptions of issues that he cared about. This is a bottom-up thing, and this is what I really had to grapple with in the book. And I went back to 2008 when I was a young staffer for John McCain in Iowa, and just kind of thinking about the crowds that showed up to those McCain-Palin rallies. And I realized I really should have seen this then. And I interviewed people that I worked with back then, and we all kind of saw it, but we just compartmentalized it in a box. This is a bottom-up problem. It's coming from voters. It's a demand-side problem, and they're the tail that's wagging Donald Trump, not the other way around. And so I think, to your point, that shows that this is going to continue until some leaders return to Washington who are willing to buck the most extreme parts of the party. And unfortunately, I don't see too many people who fit that bill right now in Washington, D.C. on the Republican side.
Tim,